War movies of the 1960s had it all: grand battles, patriotic characters, and star-studded casts. But not everyone made it to the big stages. Crushed by bigger war epics, unconventional storytelling, or being ahead of their time, here are 10 of the most underrated war movies of the 1960s. Number 10. The Secret Invasion, 1964. When it comes to gritty classics of the 1960s, I'll be the first to admit The Dirty Dozen sits in its own stratosphere. The 1967 hit about a ragtag band of criminals sent on a journey of no return is everything you'd expect from a war classic: violence, style, and a truckload of tension. But what if I told you that The Dirty Dozen wasn't as original as you think? Yup, a low-budget war film 3 years prior laid the groundwork for the swashbuckling concept: 1964's The Secret Invasion, a criminally underrated masterpiece. Directed by the king of B-movies, Roger Corman, The Secret Invasion proves time and again that you don't need millions of dollars to deliver gripping action, complex characters, and a genuinely suspenseful story. Shot in Yugoslavia on a shoestring budget of $600,000, Corman envisioned the idea of recruiting criminals for a high-risk military mission and turned it into a thrilling World War II adventure movie. The setup is simple but effective. It's 1943, and British intelligence assembles 5 convicted criminals for a dangerous mission: rescue an Italian general from Nazi captivity and convince him to turn his army against Hitler. Sounds familiar? Well, that's because Richard Conte later borrowed the exact concept for Operation Cross Eagles. But here's the thing: not even Conte's Mona Lisa could adorn the raw energy and compelling character dynamics that make The Secret Invasion so entertaining. And the best part, Corman's ensemble cast is surprisingly strong. We've got Raph Vallone playing a kingpin seeking absolution, Mickey Rooney as a demolitions expert, and Henry Silva exuding cold-blooded menace as a silent yet deadly assassin. Even Ed Burns, a man so often criticized for his performances, smashed an inch-perfect portrayal of a reluctant hero. What could possibly be better than that? Despite having a meager budget down to the T, The Secret Invasion delivered a high-quality action right from the get-go. Corman proved his cinematic skill by cleverly staging suspenseful set pieces, including an escape sequence where the team snaps their fingers to keep track of time after their watches are confiscated. And the final battle? Chef's kiss. It featured explosions, gunfights, and one particularly grim moment where a character uses his own blood to lead German attack dogs astray. There's not a single person on the planet who wouldn't feel the action was raw, unpredictable, and refreshingly different from the polished spectacle of mainstream war films. Looking back, it's almost unbelievable how The Secret Invasion turned out on a shoestring budget of $600,000. The production was decent, the ensemble cast was near perfect, the cinematography took full advantage of the rugged Yugoslavian landscapes, and the score, written by Hugo Friedhofer, added a much welcome weight to the film, switching between mournful melodies and rousing battle themes. It was just spectacular. So why exactly is The Secret Invasion so underrated? First things first. Though the cast delivered sizzling performances, the film itself lacked star power. Top draws like The Dirty Dozen, which had Lee Marvin, Charles Bronson, and Jim Brown, were more appealing to fans. Thousands of Americans lined up en masse to watch their Golden Age favorites, so The Secret Invasion was left out because it didn't have favorable box office draws. Secondly, I can't help but feel Corman's reputation dented the movie a bit. He was seen as a cheapy director, so critics and audiences overlooked his offering, assuming it was just another throwaway war flick. And finally, its release by United Artists was under the radar. Production had little to no money left for massive marketing, a crucial component in making a successful film. They heavily relied on word of mouth, so it took a really long time to gain the recognition it duly deserved. But make no mistake, this is one of the best war films you've probably never seen. It's a gritty, well-acted, action-packed thriller that punches far above its weight. So yeah, if you love The Dirty Dozen, do yourself a favor and check out this 2-hour, no intelligence required action fest. It might just be the forgotten classic you've been looking for. Speaking of hits you'll not want to miss, here's the next criminally underrated movie on our list. Number 9. Hell is for Heroes, 1962. War movies in the early 1960s were different gravy. Directors took advantage of the unquenchable thirst for grand, action-packed epics to make groundbreaking hits like The Longest Day, rich with vast battle sequences, A-list stars, and sweeping panoramas of World War II. It was well received and adored by audiences, but had dire consequences on modest offerings. Hell is for Heroes was one of them. Pulling away from the grand battlefields and thousands of extras typical of war movies in the era, it zeroed in on a small, desperate group of American soldiers trying to hold the line against an overwhelming enemy. But don't take this to mean it was a watered-down drama. It was tense and one of the most gripping war films of its era, despite its low budget. Here's how director Don Siegel made it happen. Set in 1944 near the Siegfried Line, the film follows a small band of American soldiers left to defend their position against a much larger German force. Facing insurmountable odds, they turn to deception, creating the illusion of a much larger defense to stall the Germans long enough for reinforcements to arrive. But as impressive as that may seem, the true brilliance of Hell is for Heroes lies elsewhere. Unlike traditional war films that celebrate heroism, this one removes any sense of romanticism, exposing the raw, unfiltered reality of battle. The soldiers aren't portrayed as noble warriors marching toward victory. They're exhausted, cynical, and in many ways just trying to survive. Take Steve McQueen's portrayal of Private John Reese, for instance. He was feral, dark, and unpredictable, everything a traditional hero stood against. And yes, the rest of the cast was equally strong, despite many of them being lesser-known names at the time. James Coburn is by no means a Golden Age great, but he was fantastic as a resourceful soldier with a flair for gadgets. Bobby Darin added a bit of levity, while Fess Parker, Joseph Hoover, Harry Gardino, and a debuting Bob Newhart delivered their lines. Another thing that set Hell is for Heroes apart was its atmosphere. The Secret Invasion was rightfully praised for its Yugoslavian panoramas, but Hell was shot in stark black and white, monochromatic colors to emphasize the isolation and vulnerability of the soldiers. German forces at the time were thought to be faceless and devious, so the palette did a wonderful job of heightening the tension and theme of dehumanization, a recurring motif in Siegel's work. Alas, in spite of its brilliance, Hell is for Heroes struggled to find a large audience upon release. It was too small, too grim, and too unconventional for a time when war movies were expected to be sprawling epics. The low budget certainly didn't help. The production was riddled with problems, including an allegedly miserable cast and a slashed budget before filming even began. It was also shot amidst the blistering heat waves of California during the summer of 1961. This forced much of the production to shift to night shoots, though it inadvertently worked in the film's favor. Much of World War II combat took place under the cover of darkness. Hell is for Heroes may not have been a massive box office success, but it's definitely worth the while. With its rich storytelling, standout performances, and spine-tingling tension, Hell is for Heroes proves that sometimes less really is more. Coming next is an anti-heroic, morally ambiguous film that sadly never resonated well with mainstream audiences of the time. Number 8. The Long and the Short and the Tall. Ever wondered how one of the 12 most popular films at the British box office in 1961, according to Kine Weekly, failed to make waves abroad? The Long and the Short and the Tall had everything upon release. Intense drama, a razor-sharp script, a star-studded cast, unlike the prior films we've discussed. Yet it barely blew up across the Atlantic. Set in the dense jungles of Burma during World War II, the story follows a small British patrol led by Sergeant Mitchum, portrayed by Richard Todd. Their mission? A psychological warfare experiment using sound recordings to confuse the enemy. It was relatively simple until they captured a lone Japanese soldier. A tactical mission suddenly turned into a moral dilemma. Should they kill him to ensure their survival, or uphold a sense of ethics even in war? One of the first things you'd notice about the film is that it's by far the rawest depiction of British soldiers in battle. The characters and conversations hit home. The men are nothing but vulnerable, and many of them undergo amazing development. This made the film feel real, touching, and relatable. Another reason the movie shined was its embrace of its theatrical roots. Adapted from a stage play, it used tight, claustrophobic settings to intensify the drama. And while some performances start off exaggerated, particularly Lawrence Harvey's cocky, cynical Private Bamforth, every facet transforms into a raw and genuine experience at the climax. So why doesn't it get the appraisal it deserves? As explained earlier, the British war drama focused more on psychological tension and dialogue than action, making it less marketable to American audiences drawn to epic themes like those in The Longest Day. However, that wasn't the sole reason. Unbeknownst to audiences, the film suffered from a myriad of internal issues. Roy Ward Baker wanted to make the film at rank, but the company would not authorize the purchase of the rights. Associated British later bought the film rights in April 1959 and assigned the role of the sergeant to Richard Todd, but more issues arose during production. Filming was postponed, and Todd was very disappointed with the script, the decision to film in a studio, and the failure to cast Peter O'Toole. He also hated the experience of working with Lawrence Harvey and took it for granted.
It's gonna get heavier. That's the reason the Japanese are pulling out, heading back to Michigan to defend the airstrip.
Number 7. Merrill's Marauders, 1962. Contrary to popular belief, war movies are incredibly difficult to piece together. They're plagued by the challenge of balancing gritty realism with cinematic spectacle, a feat that many failed to achieve. Merrill's Marauders wasn't one of them. Directed by the legendary Samuel Fuller, this film isn't about rah-rah patriotism or larger-than-life heroics. Instead, it gives you a first-hand experience of the mud and exhaustion of the Burma campaign, making you feel the weight of the soldiers' relentless march, their hunger, their fatigue, and their fading sense of self. Is it a feel-good war movie? No, but it's a war movie that actually feels like war. As far as the plot goes, the film follows, or at least tries to follow, the real-life exploits of the 5307th Composite Unit, better known as Merrill's Marauders, an elite group of American soldiers tasked with the near-impossible mission of trekking deep into Japanese-occupied Burma to disrupt enemy supply lines and pave the way for future Allied advances. The Japanese weren't their only opposition, though. They battled disease, malnutrition, and sheer exhaustion. The director did an amazing job capturing this grueling ordeal with an almost documentary-like approach. Unlike other war films of the era, Merrill's Marauders excluded elaborate backstories or sentimental moments. It stripped war of any sense of glory, showing it for what it truly is, a brutal, unrelenting grind. There's even a scene where the troops, starving and exhausted, finally reach a supply drop, only to be ordered to keep moving because enemy forces will be drawn to the parachutes. It's a gut punch, but come on, you've got to appreciate the realism there. That said, despite the film's commitment to authenticity, Merrill's Marauders was not the success it could have been. It had a strong cast and a solid budget, but the filmmakers tried to make everyone happy. Studio interference and the desire to portray the U.S. in a positive light caused significant deviations from historical accuracy. This frustrated critics and audiences who felt the movie lacked the grittier aspects of combat that would have made the story more impactful. Then there was the issue of shallow character portrayal. Critics argued that the film failed to adequately convey the psychological toll of intense combat and extreme conditions. Key moments in the Marauders story, such as the high level of friendly fire and the devastating impact of illness on the troops, were removed. But hey, it's still an amazing film that every war fan needs to experience at least once. The same can be said for this next film. Number 6. Battle of Britain, 1969. Wait, I know what you're thinking. Battle of Britain on this list? Director Guy Hamilton put together a massive war epic filled with a star-studded cast, some of the most breathtaking aerial combat sequences ever filmed, and a production budget that spared no expense. And what better way to do this than starring legends like Michael Caine, Laurence Olivier, and Christopher Plummer? The cast delivered a visual spectacle, and the aerial combat sequences were off the charts. Rather than relying on models or special effects, the production went to extreme lengths, gathering over 100 authentic aircraft and even real World War II pilots. And yet, despite all of this, it failed to truly connect with audiences. So what went wrong? Well, much like Merrill's Marauders, director Guy Hamilton focused too much on realism instead of the most important thing, a cohesive narrative. The film felt fragmented, jumping between different perspectives, RAF pilots, high command, and even the Luftwaffe, without fully developing any of them. Personal dramas were inserted awkwardly, often feeling like afterthoughts rather than meaningful character arcs. And don't even get me started on the choppy edits. Many scenes appeared to lead into or reference moments that weren't even there. Then there was the screenplay. Decent, yet lacking the emotional weight needed to truly immerse audiences. The historical significance of the battles were never fully explained, making it difficult for those unfamiliar with the event to truly root for an outcome. The aftermath? A string of unimpressed critics and an indifferent audience. That being said, Battle of Britain is still a polished piece of war filmmaking. It may not have been a box office success, but its aerial sequences remain some of the finest ever put to film, making it a fascinating watch for aviation and history enthusiasts alike. Number 5. Battle of Neretva, 1969. Ever heard of this 1969 film? No? Well, I'm not surprised. Despite being the most expensive film ever produced in Yugoslavia, featuring Hollywood stars like Yul Brynner and Orson Welles, and delivering some of the most intense battle sequences of its time, this war epic remains largely unknown outside of Europe. But don't let its obscurity fool you. This is a film that deserves the world's attention. Set during World War II, Battle of Neretva tells the story of Yugoslav partisans under Josip Broz Tito as they fight against the Axis powers, including German forces, Italian troops, and the Chetniks. One thing I really loved about the film is how it embraces not only the brutality of war, but also the ethnic and political divisions within Yugoslavia. The battle scenes? Top-notch. Expect to see massive tanks rolling through mountain passes, soldiers trudging through the mud and snow, and villages turned into battlegrounds. Production really took no prisoners in that department. Another thing worth praising is how Battle of Neretva explored overlooked aspects of war, like the partisan struggle to care for the wounded, including those suffering from typhus who were treated almost like medieval plague victims. And let's not forget the cast. Welles and Brynner may have made all the noise, but the film also featured talents like Hardy Kruger, Kurt Jurgens, and Slovenian actor Lojze Roseman. The only disappointment? The film never achieved widespread success. It scored an Academy Award nomination for Best Foreign Language Film, yet few people outside Europe actually saw it. Why? It's hard to say, but what we do know is that it lacked the marketing muscle of Hollywood productions. International acclaim was often skewed toward Western markets, so Battle of Neretva never got the same level of promotion. It also ran into issues with pacing and narrative structure. Some critics found it uneven, with moments of brilliance weighed down by propagandistic oversimplifications. In spite of its flaws, Battle of Neretva remains one of the most intriguing war epics of the 60s. Could it have been a bigger success if it had been a Hollywood production? Well, that's a question we're thinking about, but for now, let's move on to our next film. Number 4. Castle Keep, 1969. Boy, oh boy, where do we even start from? 1969's Castle Keep was released with a lot of promise. It was supposed to be a unique, dreamlike film that attempted to blend existential philosophy with the traditional World War II genre. The film is based on William Eastlake's 1965 novel of the same name, and according to the New York Times writer Vincent Canby, accomplishes the dubious feat of being both anti- and pro-war at the same time. The concept wasn't exactly bad, it was refreshing, different, and unique. However, how many times have we seen ambitious projects get crushed by the weight of its promise? Castle Keep didn't exactly have this problem, though. It delivered on its unconventional promise to a large extent. However, it failed to resonate well with mainstream audiences. It pioneered a fusion of dreamlike visuals and deep philosophical questions about war and art, but it only stood out as an oddity in the war movie genre. Many were also dismayed by the fact that the first half of the film spent considerable time showing soldiers indulging in leisure activities, like drinking, smoking, and visiting a brothel, rather than showing the soldiers preparing for battle. It was yet another far cry from the adrenaline-pumping action American audiences were used to. The aftermath? An ambitious film resulting in mixed reviews and a less than successful box office performance. Its $8 million budget was met with a return of $1.8 million in the box office. But hey, it wasn't all doom and gloom. Sidney Pollack's vision was praised by critics for having a philosophical approach in exploring and dissecting profound themes, such as the clash between war and art. Its visual style was soothing and still has its place as a thought-provoking piece in cinema history. With a careful tweak, Castle Keep could have ushered in a new era of the niche, but wishes aren't horses. If you enjoy psychological renditions of war rather than adrenaline-pumping action, give the film a shot and see how underrated it is yourself. It may just be worth its disjointed plot and disconnected aesthetics. Before we go into the final 3 picks on our list, chances are you're having fun exploring Hollywood's forgotten gems. So why don't you subscribe to the channel and turn on post notifications so you won't miss out on our next releases. Already done? Perfect. Here's...
All right, get moving. Over to the weapon pits. You hear that, Connolly? Move along. Don't get yourself shot till you get to the other side. Why not, Tosh?
Number 3. Too Late the Hero, 1968. When Robert Aldrich released Too Late the Hero in 1970, the world watched with eager breaths, expecting a masterpiece to follow up the director's The Dirty Dozen. But boy, were we in for a surprise. Rather than matching her elder cousin's explosive bravado, Too Late the Hero had a much more philosophical approach. It was set on a Pacific island during World War II and follows a reluctant American lieutenant and cynical British soldier played by Cliff Robertson and Michael Caine, respectively. Unlike Castle Keep, Too Late the Hero knew exactly what it was going for. The Dirty Dozen reveled in its anti-authoritarian spirit and violent spectacle. But we were given a more brooding, laid-back weave that expressed how fighters wrestle with self-preservation, duty, and morality. Was it a bad twist? Of course not. The film's Vietnam-era cynicism was impossible to ignore. The lush jungle setting and questionable motivations behind the mission tailored to the moral ambiguity that defined many war films of the late 1960s and early 70s. It only failed to make its theme land all the time. There were many scenes where the characters spent a lot of time debating their personal philosophies rather than engaging in meaningful action. Sounds familiar? Castle Keep had that same issue, slow pacing that often felt sluggish. Michael Caine's performance, however, is a standout. Gifted with the ability to elevate material even in lesser films, Caine played a very complex, well-layered soldier who is neither fully noble nor entirely selfish. He sat at the sweet spot between pragmatic survivalism and begrudging camaraderie, making him the most compelling figure on the screen. Unfortunately, Cliff Robertson wasn't so lucky. His portrayal of an apathetic officer, disinterested in heroism, never found a way to be likable or even particularly interesting. On a technical level, the film leaves much to be desired. Some battle sequences are tense and well-crafted, but others feel awkwardly staged, lacking the visceral impact of Aldrich's best work. The script, co-written by Lucas Heller, also has moments of sharp dialogue, but also suffers from overly contrived plotting. Interestingly, Heller himself later criticized the film, calling it a tremendously self-conscious examination of heroism that became weighed down by its own ambitions. Was he right, though? Short answer, yes. Too Late the Hero flopped commercially, failing to recapture the box office magic of The Dirty Dozen. Audiences looking for action found too much dialogue, while those seeking deeper commentary found the film too uneven. In the end, Aldrich's exploration of heroism, though ambitious, was too convoluted for its own good, making the film more of a curiosity than a classic. But make no mistake, it's certainly worth the effort. Number 2, Play Dirty, 1969. Coming in at number 2, we have André de Toth's 1969 hit Play Dirty, a war film that, as its name implies, refuses to play by the usual rules. At first glance, Play Dirty feels like yet another entry in the long line of World War II action movies. But no, audiences are graced with a far grittier, more cynical narrative. De Toth, as expected, threw conventional heroism out the window, replacing it with a morally ambiguous dilemma where survival meant sacrificing any sense of decency. As far as the plot goes, we have Michael Caine as a British officer assigned to lead a band of criminals on a seemingly impossible mission, destroying a Nazi fuel depot in the North African desert. Sounds tough? There's more. While he's technically in charge of the team, the real power struggle is between him and Captain Leach, an amoral, self-serving mercenary played by Nigel Davenport. We're not going to spoil much, but expect a film whose hero is plagued with a nasty dilemma, keeping a moral compass intact or being as ruthless as the enemy to survive. Get it? The key theme that sets Play Dirty apart is its unrelenting cynicism. Traditional war films celebrate camaraderie and sacrifice, but here we have a unique take suggesting that war is a little more than a game of manipulation played by those in power. The higher-ups are as corrupt and self-serving as the criminals they send on suicide missions, and the final act delivers one of the most brutal gut punches in war cinema. But hey, Play Dirty wouldn't be on the list if it ever got the recognition it deserved. Some critics found its script dry and the dialogue overly bitter, while audiences felt the ending was abrupt and unsatisfying at the time. Other critics argued that the film struggled to balance its anti-war message with the action-packed demands of a war movie. It tried to appeal to both sides, but lost both. So, is it worth the watch? Absolutely. Play Dirty is one of the most underrated gems of the 1960s. Its nihilistic take on war was ahead of its time and influenced later films. It may have been buried under the widespread appeal of The Dirty Dozen or Kelly's Heroes, but for those who appreciate war films that dare to be different, it's well worth a watch. The same can be said for the next film on our list.
Oh God, Swanee, I need you. I need you. You're everything that counts.
Number 1. The Sergeant, 1968. Come on, guys, you didn't think we were going to wrap up this list without talking about 1968's The Sergeant, did you? Here we follow Master Sergeant Albert Callan, a hardened World War II veteran stationed at a remote post in France. He is strict, disciplined, respected, and feared. However, beneath this gruff exterior lies a battle he can't win: his repressed attraction to Private Swanson, a younger, handsome subordinate. Guys, the Sergeant has everything. It's emotional, tough, tragic, and repressive. It tackles the suffocating nature of rigid masculinity within the military. So why is it overlooked? Well, critics rightfully pointed out the film's character arc lacks clarity. There were many scenes where Callan's fixation on Swanson were framed as a menacing obsession, but it quickly changed to ambiguous in others. The second point of contention was the question of studio interference. The ending was altered to avoid controversy, given Hollywood's moral stance on homosexuality. But here's the thing. Despite these flaws, The Sergeant is one of the most brutally honest portrayals of military life ever put on screen. It neither glorifies war nor paints the Army as a utopia for camaraderie. The directors were honest, highlighting the bleakness, alienation, and quiet brutality of a rigid, male-dominated world where emotions are a liability. It left soldiers feeling almost too real, making you wonder how they captured it so accurately. Spoiler alert, the ending might not sit well with modern audiences, especially those looking for a more progressive take on LGBTQ+ themes. However, it dared to crack open perspectives, forcing the industry to confront their own biases. But this brings us to the bigger picture. Films, no matter how flawed, controversial, or sometimes forgotten, still hold immense value. Each of these 10 films captured struggles that, in some ways, remain relevant today. But hey, we're only human. If we missed a film you think deserves recognition, head into the comments and let us know. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out the next video on your screen for more Hollywood tea.